Chapter 45. Night Flight. It was cold up here, and the air was far too thin for comfort. It was hard to breathe, and every breath drew that icy cold air into Reyes's lungs and made him shiver. His wings were working well, but with every beat he could imagine icicles forming along them. Reyes found it hard to maintain his height. His instincts kept screaming at him that he was too high, and every so often he would find that he had slightly angled himself downwards. He couldn't begin to guess how much height he had lost doing that, but it could be at least a couple of 100 feet. He also began to feel a strong concern for his girlfriend. How was she managing in these conditions? Might the extreme cold be doing anything to harm the baby? Gaggara was a much better flyer than he was, but somehow he doubted she was faring much better. Reyes couldn't resist taking a quick glance at Gaggara. There she was. She had settled into a flying pattern just behind him and slightly on his right side. She was following him loyally. Once they had passed beyond the southern wall of the city of Goldspawn, Reyes felt it was safe enough to descend to a warmer height. Soon he was flying just a little above treetop height. Even here there was a cool wind blowing at them as they flew. It was only 5 miles from the city to the castle. At casual flight speed, Reyes felt it should take him no more than 20 to 30 minutes at the most. That was assuming that he could actually find the castle. The last time he had passed the area below, he had been heading in the other direction, on foot. On that occasion he had only found Goldspawn, a city several hundred times larger than Castle Demoth, by finding a road that led to it. Reyes was sure that finding any place from the air would be easier than from the ground, but it was the darkest part of night, and even with his eyes enhanced by cat's sight, seeing something as small as Castle Demoth wasn't an easy task. Reyes felt he knew Castle Demoth and its immediate surrounds well. He had lived there for most of his life. He had played in those trees as a boy. He had hunted in those trees with his father, and he had visited many of the outlying villages, again with his father. Yet, from high in the sky, during the darkest hours of the night, Reyes didn't recognise a thing. Well, he thought he recognised a certain clearing, but it should have been south of the castle, and by his reckoning he was still somewhere to the north. Besides, he should be able to see the houses of a nearby village from the clearing, and there were no houses in sight. The castle didn't lie much further south than that clearing. The battlements, lined as they were with torches, made the structure actually a little easier to find than Reyes had been expecting. Reyes could easily imagine that he could fly within 100 feet of the structure and not see the castle's dark walls, had it not been for the light coming off of it. As it was, it shone out like a beacon in the darkness. Reyes flew on past the castle, deciding to approach the walls at the front rather than the rear. That was where the main gates of the castle was. That was the direction a friend would approach from. Reyes landed in the branches of a large tree that grew at the edge of the forest facing the castle. He knew this tree. He had climbed it several times when he was younger. Never had he ever climbed as high as he was now, though. Gaggara found a sturdy branch on the same tree and landed there. "We're here much quicker than I expected," Reyes commented. He briefly remembered how long it had taken him to walk those 5 miles, although admittedly he hadn't exactly taken a direct route. "Humph," came the reply. There was a strange tone to the sound, as if Gaggara wasn't sure about the wisdom of what they were about to do. Reyes had to admit he agreed. He had spent 6 years of his life in the edifice before him, and now the place scared him. What sort of reception could he expect if he landed on the battlements? Would the archers on the walls even give him the time he needed to fly to the battlements before they opened fire? This was beginning to feel very much like a fool's errand. Reyes hesitated. He didn't want Gaggara to get hurt. If they'd shot him, well, he wouldn't be happy, but at least his girl and his child would be safe. "I think it might be best if you were to wait here until I give you the all clear." "Not a chance," Gaggara replied sternly. "I didn't fly all this way just to sit in the trees and wait for you to return." Reyes turned his attention back to the wall of the castle. From this distance it was hard to see any movement on those battlements, but he knew the soldiers were there. He hated to consider it, but the best way to approach without spooking the guard might be to walk up to the gates and knock. Flying across the top of the battlements and landing on the parapet above the gate might look very impressive, but it would only look impressive for about the 2 seconds before the archers shot them. "Oh no," Gaggara suddenly cried out. Reyes looked around suddenly, feeling on his guard. Had they been seen by a patrol or something? "What is it?" "My pretties," Gaggara said. "I left them behind." Oh, Race commented. Those stupid, worthless rocks that Gaggara had collected. Don't worry, love. I'll get you some more. You will? Gaggara said hopefully. Come on, Race said. Keep low. He jumped off the branch and began to fly towards the castle. With every foot closer he got to it, he descended by a similar amount until the tips of his wings were all but touching the ground every time he flapped them. Gaggara followed close behind. She might have been slightly higher than he as they crossed the wasteland between the tree and the castle, but she also flew quite low. Their grey bodies camouflaged by the darkness of night, Reyes and Gaggara were able to cover a lot of ground between the trees and the castle, virtually without fear of being seen by the guards on the walls. Reyes finally landed just across the moat from the other side of the great castle gates. He eyed the moat suspiciously. It looked dark and foreboding, just waiting for him to fall in and drown. Reyes hated that moat. He always had, and even now it filled him with a sense of dread just standing next to it. What now? Gaggara whispered. She broke Reyes away from his thoughts. Reyes took a step back and looked up at the battlements that sat immediately above the gates. There was a single guard up there, and two others, one in each of the round towers that bracketed the gates. I guess we'll have to fly up, Reyes told her. I wish I had some sort of white flag to show that we came in peace. After you, Gaggara voiced. Thank you, Reyes replied. He couldn't help feeling that he was making a big mistake. His heart started to thump heavily in his chest, and he could feel himself shiver a little with fear and trepidation as to what might come. In the end, Reyes took to the arrogance simply because he thought that if he waited too much longer, he might end up worrying himself out of it. He landed on the battlement just above the gate, or more accurately, he landed on one of the crenulations, looking slightly down on the guard that patrolled there. Gaggara landed by his side a moment later. She stayed very close to him, and he could feel her body vibrating just slightly. Reyes wasn't the only one suffering from fear. The three nearest guards all acted quickly. The one right below them dropped his bow and unsheathed his sword. A human with a sword didn't stand much chance against the claws of a harpy, let alone two. He was either a very brave man, or he was very ignorant of his danger. The two in the towers that bracketed the gate each knocked arrows to their bows and took aim. Gaggara edged forward a little. She looked like a coiled spring, ready to pounce on the guards. Her claws seemed to be quite restless as she sheathed and unsheathed them. Reyes rested an arm on her shoulder to restrain her. Then he addressed the guards. Don't shoot, he pleaded. He looked at each of the guards in turn. We've come in peace. He raised his free hand in the air so as to look as harmless as possible. The two archers hesitated. They didn't fire, but they kept their bows aimed directly at the two harpies. The guard with the sword didn't seem too anxious to engage the harpies in combat either. Please, Reyes begged. I need to speak with your leader. Could one of you let either Tia or Sir Richmond know that we're here? Harpies! The guard on the parapet started to shout. Sound the alarm! We've caught two of them, but there could be more in the nearby woods. Reyes briefly considered casting a spell on the guard to make him easier to manipulate. The problem was, it would be very hard to make the required gestures when not one of the three guards seemed to be willing to take their eyes off him. Besides, the spell required that the guard still consider the request reasonable. How could Reyes expect the guard to think that anything a harpy suggested was reasonable? Gaggara seemed to be edging forward just a little, as if getting ready to attack again. Her claws were still restless. What was more, since she had evidently no idea what was passing between Reyes and the three guards, she was beginning to feel very tense. Reyes tightened his grip on Gaggara's shoulder and said, Don't. Gaggara relaxed, but only a little. The guards, on the other hand, seemed to become increasingly tense at the sound of a word they didn't understand. Then the tension seemed to increase even more with a sudden cry from below. What's going on? Harpies, sir, the guard shouted. Harpies? Where? The voice shouted. We caught two of them attacking the front gate. There might be more in the nearby forest. Should I go and wake Sir Duncan or Sir Fawkes, sir? The guard shouted. Reyes didn't recognise either of those two names. Two new knights in the service of the Duke, no doubt, but unless either of them replaced Sir Richmond as spymaster, there was no point in him seeing either. Not yet, soldier. I'd like to know a little more about our guests first, the voice replied. There are two harpies, you say? Yes, sir, the guard said. One of them speaks Flourish, and he's asking to speak to Sir Damoth. He was very brusque, though, sir. He asked for him by his first name. He? The voice asked. You're sure it's a male? He's wearing a skirt, but he sounds quite masculine, the guard replied. I suppose it could be a female. I see, the voice commented. Does this harpy by any chance happen to be wearing a sword? No, sir, the guard responded. There was a moment of hesitation, and then the voice said, Are you sure? It'd be quite an ornate sword, and very hard to miss. He doesn't, sir, the guard replied. Just a pair of silver bracelets. I lost the sword, Ray said suddenly. It was taken from me by the commander of an elven regiment. Race, the voice called. Is that you? It is, Race replied. Might I ask who I am addressing? This is Grimm, Captain Grimm. You guards can stand down. Race is an old friend, and if he says he needs to see Tia, I'd better take him. But, sir, the guard said. I said stand down, soldier, Grimm insisted. The two archers returned their arrows to their quivers, and the other guard sheathed his sword. Then, perhaps feeling a little like he was on the firing line, remaining so close to the harpies, the guard began to back away a little. Captain, really? Congratulations, Race called. Yes, Grimm replied. Chick and I both got our promotion the day after you left. Services rendered, I guess. Gaggara, still unable to understand a word of what was being said, and now seeing that the guard sheathed his sword and back away, thought it was a sign of weakness. She looked as if she was about to pursue him when Race grabbed her wrist. Remember why we're here. Sorry, she said. I'm scared. Fear makes me lash out sometimes. I understand, Race replied. Just stay calm. We're safe now. An old friend recognized me. Race, Grimm called. Yes, Race replied. The guard told me there were two of you. Who's your friend? She's my girlfriend, Race shouted back. I couldn't leave her behind. One day I hope to make her my wife. Is she safe? Grimm asked. I'd trust her with my life, Race replied. Yes, but can we trust her with Tia's life? Grimm asked. I suppose we'll have to take the chance. Would you two hop down here, and I'll escort you to your father's study? Sir, the guard shouted. Should I fetch the duck and ossa forks now, sir? No, Grimm shouted back determinedly. Those two are not to know about any of this. Do you understand? Not a word of this is to be spoken to either of them, ever. As you wish, sir, the guard replied. Race jumped off the battlements and flew down to the courtyard. He landed right by where Captain Grimm was standing. Gaggara followed right behind. She eyed Grimm suspiciously after she landed, but she made no aggressive move towards him. Captain Grimm eyed Race suspiciously, and then looked uncertainly at Gaggara. He then looked back towards Race, evidently recognizing which one was he, probably because of the bracelets. It's good to see you again, though I must admit it's quite a shock to see you as you are. I rather got used to you looking human. This is what I really am, Race replied. Grimm eyed Gaggara uncertainly again. Are you sure she's safe? Race glanced at her. In the middle of a human castle, where someone might deem it necessary to shoot or otherwise attack her at any moment? No, I'm not sure either of us is safe. If you mean will she attack, I doubt it. But she is very nervous, quite on edge at the moment, so be careful not to make any sudden moves until she's had a chance to calm down. Grimm now looked quite nervous. It was hard for him to turn his eyes from Gaggara to Race. I guess you'd better follow me then. He turned and began to lead the way across the courtyard towards the castle's main residence. So, Race asked, my brother is here then? He hasn't left for the wedding? He hasn't, Grimm assured him. Come on. Race turned to Gaggara. We need to follow him to the study. Then my brother will be brought to us. Grimm almost seemed to laugh. I've learnt a little bit of Elistran in my time. I recognise the elven word for brother. Yes, Race explained. The Harpies and Goldspawn have adopted a number of elven words into their language. All the male pronouns, I bet, Grimm commented. Those are the ones, Race replied.